Hello, friends. This is Dave Hurwitz, executive editor at ClassicsToday.com, here with a marvelous new recording of, let me find it, it's over here in my pile. Tippett, the Midsummer Marriage. Oh, I'm so excited that this is out there. I really am. This is really, really, really cool. I am not kidding, because there's only one other recording of this opera, a very good one with Colin Davis from Covent Garden. And then there's the sort of horrible pirate original performance, terrible sound, not worth listening to original, that the only reason it exists is because Joan Sutherland created the role of Jennifer, the young Joan Sutherland in the 1950s. I think it was like 55 or somewhere around there. But again, nothing special, and that's not worth even hearing. It's unlistenable. But this is the real deal, folks. I mean, absolutely the real deal. It features, let's see, the London Philharmonic with choir and the English National Opera Chorus, because you need lots of choral stuff in here, conducted by Edward Gardner, who is a big fan of Tippett, and he really is a wonderful conductor in this music. It's totally stupendous, and a wonderful cast. You've got Robert Murray as Mark, Rochelle Nichols as Jennifer, or Rachel, whatever she calls herself, Ashley Richis, the bass baritone, as Kingfisher, Jennifer France as Bella, Toby Spence as Jack, Claire Barnett-Jones as Sosostris, Suzanne Bickley as the She-Ancient, and that sounds exciting, and Joshua Bloom as the He-Ancient, because they come in pairs. This whole opera comes in pairs. Even Kingfisher and Sosostris are a pair. So there you go, the Midsummer Marriage. What the heck is the Midsummer Marriage? I've wanted to talk about this opera forever. It is one of the great masterpieces of 20th century opera. I'm not kidding. I mean that in all seriousness. And the plot is so harebrainingly silly and ridiculous that you're not going to believe it. But that's the point, because the plot is a sort of Jungian psychological updating of the magic flute. It's the same story as the Magic Flute, to the extent the Magic Flute has a story. Now, the overall story of the Magic Flute, aside from racism and misogyny, which we're going to set aside for a moment, is the transformation or preparing a couple for the sanctity of marriage. That's really what it's about, sort of. Kind of. And all the rest, the Queen of the Night and the bird critters and the bird critter's wife and the crazy servants and the Masonic stuff and the secret holy order and, all of that is just window dressing, leading up to the fact that Tamino and Pamina have to be made suitable for the rite of marriage. Now, of course, the Magic Flute, Tamino has to go through these rituals of purification, and Pamina has to simply be tormented, and because she's a woman, and women are unsuitable to everything, as we're told in the Magic Flute, barely suitable for marriage. But they wind up making her suitable anyway, after, they manage to make her suffer as much as possible, and everything turns out happily. Well, that can't happen in 1950-something, so you have a couple. You have Mark and Jennifer, who are going to get married. So let me just take you through the story. And you do get a libretto with the actual text, which you're not going to believe. I wouldn't dare read it for you. It makes no sense at all. But let me take you through the story, and then I will tell you why this is so fabulous. I mean, it really is. So here's the deal. Mark, and it starts out with, there's a temple. There's a temple in the middle of the woods. And inside the temple are two old creatures, the He-Ancient and the She-Ancient, which is what Mark calls them. But there's a problem there, actually, because we'll get to the problem later. Anyway, that's what he calls them. So he's asked his friends to show up for their wedding. And so it begins with a chorus, and they're in the woods, and they're looking at this temple, and they don't know what's going on. And the temple doors open, and the He-Ancient and She-Ancient come out. They stand there looking very, very regal and ancient-like. And they have a dance company that lives in the temple, and they start a very formal-looking dance. And that's what they do. And in the middle of this dance, Mark comes roaring in and goes, "Stop!" And the He-Ancient goes, young man, what right have you thus to break the dance?" Because they're British. They call it a dance, not a dance. Anyway. And he says, I want a new dance for my wedding day. Like that. He's kind of a baby, and he's kind of petulant. And I'm not going to sing the whole opera, although I would love to. I mean, what could be more fun? But they tell him that he should not want to change the dance because it's dangerous and it will destroy beauty and tradition and he doesn't care. And they show him what might happen if there's a new dance, but it turns out to be the old dance. And then they trip the dancer, Strephon, who limps around a little bit, which is quite nasty of them. And Mark yells at them, and they have this whole big fight. And finally, the He Ancient says, you will learn a new dance before you leave this place today. And so they go back into their little temple and the gates close. And then all of Mark's friends come out. They say, well, what the hell was that? And he says, well, those are the he and she ancients. I don't know what they are, but I think they know the secret of my birth, but will not tell me. Well, we don't ever find out the secret of his birth either. That's one of those holes in the plot. I met with Tippett and I said to him, you should have talked to me before you did this because I could have cleaned up some of those logical inconsistencies. And not the least of which is that Jennifer, who he's going to marry, her father, whose name is Kingfisher, knows that they're called the Ancients, even though Mark says, I call them the Ancients, and no one else knows that they're called the Ancients. Well, never mind. And Tippett just sort of smiled and looked at me and said, yeah, well, I know. Oh, well, that's the way it goes. And that was the way it went. So anyway, so he explains to them that business, and he's waiting for Jennifer, and he sings a beautiful aria about how he loves and sings like the bird, and he mentions the lark ascending, maybe a little stab there at Vaughan Williams, he, and he does his own little, wah, I love, and he's in love. Okay, so Jennifer pops up for the wedding, and she's dressed to travel. She has her little duffel bag with her, and she says, I can't marry you. I'm not enlightened enough. I need to be higher and better and superior and beyond. Oh, and there's a staircase. There's a staircase in the middle of this thing that goes to nowhere. It just goes up. And so she says, I need to discover myself before I marry you. And he's really pissed. And they have an argument. And she goes up the staircase and vanishes out of sight. She gets the support of the ladies in the choir, whereas the men get, support Mark, naturally. And Mark says, well, if she can go up there, I can go down there, because there's a cave. And he's going to go into the cave to discover the depths of the earth or something like that. Who knows what he's going for? And he goes running into the cave. And that is the first sort of big scene thing. So that's what happens. Meanwhile, Kingfisher, who is Jennifer's wealthy business tycoon father, shows up to get Jennifer and to prevent the marriage. But of course, she's up somewhere and he's down somewhere. And he shows up with his secretary, Bella, his pretty secretary, who is the Papagena character, the soubrette soprano, which you have to have in these operations. And they have a discussion about where Jennifer and Mark might be, and Bella's there, and he talks to the ancients and asks where his daughter is, and they tell him it's none of his damn business, and he says, well, I'm who I am, and I can do whatever I want, and they say, oh yeah, just try. So after this big fight, gets going, and there's a big choral apotheosis, and then Jennifer shows up coming down the staircase, and she talks about how she's now divorced from earthly things and materialistic concerns, and she's a being of the sky and the whatever, and her father says, oh, would you get off of it? That's such nonsense. And then because she comes back, Mark has to come back. So he comes whipping up from his cave and does an aria, which is it's his equivalent of her aria about how he was down in the darkness and he can't stand the light anymore because he's been with the Earth Mother snuggling around, and he's in touch with the soil and the beating heart of the planet and whatnot. And so then he and Jennifer have another argument. And as a result of the argument, she realizes she needs to go where he was, and he realizes he needs to go where she was. So she goes into the cave, and he goes up the staircase, and that's the end of Act 1. Are we clear? Now in Act 2, Jennifer and Mark don't show up at all because they're being processed wherever the processing center is for, spiritual enlightenment and transmogrification. Instead, we deal with the soubrette couple because Bella has a boyfriend named Jack who's a handyman. And Jack is supposed to do something like pry open the gates of the temple to find Jennifer or go up the stairs or something. So they're a couple. And they do a very adorable little scene about how they're going to get married and it's going to be really cute and charming and sweet. And they go into the shadow of the wood to have a little nookie. And while they're doing that, the dancers pop up and they do the 3 ritual dances, which are also available separately, coming to a record store near you. The 3 ritual dances. It's a suite that Tippett extracted from the opera. Now, the ritual dances are all about mating. They're about the pursuit of the female of the male in this particular case. The female is the huntress. The male is the hunted. And so the first one is, they're all different critters. There's like a fish and an otter, and there's a bird and a raptor, a bird of prey. And so they do these 3 dances. And the last one, Bella comes screaming on. She's watching the raptor, going to stomp on Strephon, who's the little birdie. And she's in a panic, and Jack calms her down, and the dancers go away, and they talk more about their ultimate domestic felicity. And the music for this, by the way, is just gorgeous. While this nonsense is going on, the music is incredibly fabulous. It really is. So that's Act 2. And it's only like half an hour long. Then in Act 3, we are back to our original scenario where, there's this big sort of drunken revel going on, even though no one knows why they're drunken or reveling because Mark and Jennifer are nowhere. But everyone's just basically partying on the steps of the temple. And while they're partying, Jack comes whipping in, again with Bella and Kingfisher, and he's dressed up like as a wizard. And he has a fortune teller in tow whose name is Madame Sosostris. Now, no one's quite sure what Madame Sosostris is because no one's ever seen her. She's sort of Tippett's answer to Wagner's Erda, the Earth Mother, but she's a fortune teller, and she is hired by Kingfisher to tell him where his daughter is. And so Mark is her acolyte, and he has like this, bowl of water that she could look into, a mirror, a magic mirror. And she does this whole huge aria. It's a big scene. It's kind of like, what's her name? Not Ulrika in Un Ballo and Mascara. She's like the alto who has like one big scene in one act and then she's gone. Well, that's like this. So Sosostris does this endless aria about how she's a seeress and she sees all that was or will be or can be or should be or ought to be or had been and might be. And she goes through all the verb tenses, the perfective, the imperfective, the past present, the present perfective, the future interrogative. Once she's run her way through every grammatical contortion of the same idea, she looks into the glass and she sees a vision of Mark with his member erect. She says, "Ah, yeah." And Kingfisher gets hysterical. Jennifer's lying there, of course. That's why So Kingfisher gets hysterical and says it's a fraud and it's a sham. And he's going to unveil Sosostris, the phony. Now, Sosostris is, you don't see her. She's this gigantic, well, in the libretto it says a contraption of black veils. She's like lots of veils. And he starts ripping the veils. It's like 7 veils. The veils get ripped away. And as he's ripping the veils away, it unveils a huge flower bud. There is no Sosostris. There's just this huge flower bud. Where she's gone, nobody knows. And the bud opens. And inside are, guess who? Mark and Jennifer, partially transformed into what Tippett doesn't tell us, and they're looking extremely spiritual, and they're sitting, in like a lotus position, which must be horribly uncomfortable for the length of time they have to sit there, and they're there together with, interlinked, and Kingfisher tries to shoot Mark to get Jennifer free of his clutches, and they make a gesture of power towards him, and he has a heart attack and drops dead. Which always bothered me, frankly, because even though he's a jerk, and even though it's self-defense, he's trying to shoot Mark, the fact that he dies and they don't really care is kind of interesting. In the New York City Opera production, he comes back to life at the end, revealing that it's all just, a ritualistic, mythological reenactment, not something we need to take all that seriously. I thought that was a nice touch, that he pops up again at the end. But in the normative libretto, he's dead. And they bear him away with a little bit of mourning and a gesture or two of pacification in that direction. And then they all have an orgy. Everybody has an orgy. It's the last of the ritual dances. And everybody comes together. You got the dancers and the ancients and the chorus and Mark and Jennifer. And they're all singing about fire in summer and passion and whale sperm. I'm not kidding. I didn't invent that. It's in there. I mean, maybe it's bull sperm. It's something. It's unbelievable, the words. I mean, they make no sense. They're just a pretext for all these people to scream and yell for 15 minutes or so, which they do magnificently. It's fabulous music. And it ends, and dawn starts to come up, and everything, the stage is empty, and on come Mark and Jennifer, as they were at the beginning, except Jennifer no longer has her luggage, and they can now get married, and the chorus sings of perpetual renewal, and they all run off together, and all you see is the ruin that was the temple before the whole thing was enacted, in a glorious, wonderful peroration, which is written in simultaneous 3/4 and 2/4 times, and which is just holy hell to keep together rhythmically, but it's stunning. So that's the story. That really is the story. And that is the more logical description of it, because if you read the actual words from which I glean the story, it doesn't make it any more sensible. But the bottom line is that it's just freaking fabulous. You know why it's freaking fabulous? I'll tell you why. First of all, because Tippett is one of the few English composers perfectly comfortable with writing sexy music. He's not embarrassed. He's not a prude. He's not inhibited in any way. It all just comes blasting out of him, which is just wonderful. I mean, he's like a French composer. He was a French teacher. Maybe that's what did it. I don't know. But the music is just full of spontaneous passion, and it's got a lot of juice flowing in its bones, which is fantastic. Second of all, the music is just unbelievably wonderful. It's lyrical, it's fresh, it's vibrant, it sounds like nobody else. It moves at just an amazingly rapid pace for most of the time, and we're talking about 2 hours and 45 minutes, basically. This is not a short opera, but it is thrilling. Absolutely thrilling. The music is, if the text justified the music, and it did, because Tippett wrote it himself, the two are inextricably bound. No matter how ridiculous the words are or how silly the situations, they generate music which is absolutely magical and which makes them real for us. I mean, we don't care. And that's the third thing. The third thing is that opera is absurd anyway. What so many people don't realize when they talk about stupid librettos or crazy situations is that the whole circumstance of opera is absurd. People don't sing at each other. The pace of life doesn't move at that speed. The relationship between the text and the music and the happenings, none of that's realistic. So you might as well just go for it and make it as crazy as you possibly can, because if the music is great, it's going to be perfectly legitimate and justified. And that's what happens here. And the result is a masterpiece unlike anything else you have ever heard in your life, and I guarantee it. And you will just love it. So as I said, this is a spectacular performance. It's a live performance that was done at the Royal Festival Hall, I think, yes, on 25 September 2021. And it's live, and there's applause at the end of the whole opera, but not at the end of every act, thank God. The audience is extremely quiet. The balances are very good. The sonics are quite good. It was recorded by BBC Radio 3 for broadcast. And it's on the LPO's own label, the London Philharmonic label. I did a review of this already on classicstoday.com, which you can go and read. It's not as long as this. It's a little more brief and together, but it does talk about the singers who are all excellent. Let's just say, as a matter of course, and Gardner's a wonderful conductor of it. It's not better than Colin Davis's first version. It complements it, which is wonderful because it's really only the second recording of the opera, and people who love it will want both. You'll want to hear different angles on the work. The only thing it has, it was a little odd, is at the beginning of Act 2, I'm at measure 100, figure 114, I think it is, in the score, which I happen to have over there. There's a cymbal crash, which is not in the score, but which appears whenever the same music recurs, which it does 2 or 3 other times. And Colin Davis put the cymbal crash back in, and I wrote it into my score. And here they leave it out, which is, I don't think that's a make or break thing, do you? It's not a big deal at all. And there are also some cuts in the score, and those cuts were authorized by Tippett and are also taken in the Colin Davis recording. They happen in the ritual dances because there's a lot of repetition in this opera because it's ritualistic. So, Mark does her thing, Jennifer does her thing. There's all this symmetry going on, and it can lose a little bit of the symmetry without losing any music. So, or any music that really matters. And God knows some of the words don't matter. So there are cuts in the ritual dances to make them bipartite instead of tripartite. You won't miss a thing. And in the third act, where there seems to be a little bit more explanation than is necessary at that point, it's better to just get on with it. And get on with it they do. What a magnificent achievement this is. It's absolutely lovely. And the opera, like I said, is a stunner. So keep on listening, folks. Go for it and take care.